Welcome Year 11 to this masterclass on Macbeth. Today's theme is the supernatural. So a masterclass is very different to what we're doing in class. This is looking at the higher level contextual information and really going into detail into the themes and the background of the play. So today's focus is to look at how the theme of the supernatural is developed throughout the play. In class, we've looked at the Cornell notes method. Okay, and I would like you to use that today during this masterclass. So let's just have a quick reminder of how the Cornell notes works. So firstly, you're going to divide your page, as you can see on the screen, okay, into 3 columns. Your note-taking column, which is the large central column, your Q column or your question column, and your summary section at the bottom. Okay, so divide your paper like that. So you might want to pause this video now and get that done. What you want to do is during the lesson or the masterclass, use the note-taking column to take notes on what's being said. So you want to bullet point the main information that you're being given. The notes on the PowerPoint in the video will actually help you do this. Either immediately after the lesson or within a couple of days, you want to go back to those notes and you want to formulate questions and topic sentence based on your notes. So writing these questions or these topic headings will help you clarify the meaning, it will help you reveal relationships with your notes, it will help establish continuity of your notes, and it will strengthen your memory. So in addition, writing questions will set up a perfect stage for revision later on, because you'll be able to cover those notes and see if you can answer those questions, or cover the notes and see if you can and talk about the topic sentences. So how do we use this for revision? Okay, you want to cover your note-taking column with a sheet of paper. Look at your questions and keywords in the question and the Q column only, and say aloud in your own words the facts or the ideas indicated by the keywords. So today's session is going to be on the supernatural, and one of the questions might be, I'm just quickly looking at my Cornell notes for this masterclass, it might be, how does Macbeth react to the witches? So you want to cover those notes and see if you can answer that question in your own words. Can you answer the question, how does Macbeth react to the witches? Or one of my subheadings is light and darkness. Cover my notes and can I talk about that topic sentence? Okay. At the end of that revision session, you want to reflect on the material by asking yourself questions. For example, what's the significance of these facts? How can I apply them? Okay, how do they fit into what I already know? What might come next? How can I develop that? Then you want to spend some time reviewing your previous notes. If you do that, you'll retain a great deal for current use, as well as identify weaknesses and things that you need to work on in the next session or in the coming weeks. So we're going to look at this idea of the clash between good and evil in the play. So what's important for you to know is that Macbeth is a theological play. So let's have a look at the etymology of that word. Theological means relating to the study of the nature of God and religious belief. So Macbeth is very much about the nature of God, the nature of heaven and hell, the nature of damning your soul. Okay, so Macbeth himself is obsessed with his soul, and the tragedy of the play, and the reason it is a tragedy, is that Macbeth knowingly destroys his soul during the course of the play. He's the tragic hero. Lady Macbeth, on the other hand, is completely unaware of her soul. She isn't really bothered at the start about it, but Macbeth goes into this willingly and knowingly. Okay, so it's really important to understand that this is a theological play. So that's one of the words, the key words that you want to be taken away from this slide. So Macbeth's deepest concern throughout the play is this concept of his soul. He has this horrible, horrifying belief that he's going to damn himself by murdering Duncan, and that's where the tragedy lies, that he not only just once kind of ruins his soul. He repeatedly does that. It's what we call it, he debases his soul. So in the sleepwalking scene at the end, the doctor says unnatural deeds do breed unnatural troubles, and that's what Macbeth catastrophically does to his own soul. The play plants itself firmly in the clash between good and evil. So that is one of the central themes, this idea of if you allow evil to come into your soul, it will completely destroy it and destroy, you. Now, obviously, we've been studying this play for quite a long while, so you know what happens and what happens when. However, you've got to remember that this is a theatre production. This was designed to be seen on the stage with no background information. So when the audience settle into their seats to watch this drama for the first time, without knowing the plot, they are confronted with this concept of the supernatural in the most extraordinary way. The witches arrive with this ominous thunder and lightning. They see these three women, but are they women because they have beards? And they are muttering this series of obscure rhyming couplets, which is completely different to what the other characters in the play will how they will speak. It's completely different. So they talk in these strange rhyming couplets. So, the audience member would have been really terrified by these women because they look so unusual, they sound so unusual. They would have completely created a massive dramatic effect in Shakespeare's time. So these are the first characters that we see in this story. So they have this immediate and powerful influence on the audience. So, for example, it would have been a completely different play if the play had begun with Act 1, Scene 2 and the captain talking about how amazing Macbeth is. It would have been a completely different play. We've got to remember that this is a structural device, that Macbeth is opened with these three witches. So it defines the mood of the whole play. So the three, things I want you to take away from that is that they're important because they open the play, they arrive with this ominous thunder and lightning, they have this immediate and powerful influence on the Jacobean audience who would have been terrified of these women, and I say women in inverted commas because are they really women? And the first scene of this play defines the mood of the entire play. Okay. Myself, Miss Reader, always telling you that context is massively important, and it is. And what you've got to remember here is that we're studying Macbeth in 2021. We are a post-religious society, and that's what makes it difficult to write about the supernatural here, because on the whole, we don't believe in the supernatural the same way that Macbeth would have done. We don't believe in witches in the same way. We don't believe in our souls being damned in the same way. We just don't believe it the way they would have believed it. So we have to really, really consider this the way the Jacobean audience would have considered it. So the three witches now, these women with beards, would cause you a lot to laugh. Of course it would. But in a Jacobean audience, they would have absolutely been terrified. And what I need you to remember and what you need to get right is your understanding about the relationship between the supernatural and the human, specifically and vitally the influence that has on Macbeth himself. It's really important to understand that Macbeth would have believed deeply in his soul. He would have deeply believed in God. He would have deeply believed in the supernatural. So things that you need to know is in Shakespeare's England, women were often periodically accused of being witches for any sort of slight that they had done. So they often believed that if bad things happened, that a woman had done it to get revenge on you, and these women, often old women or women who weren't married, were accused of being these witches. Anxiety and belief in witches was widespread amongst all of the classes of society. Remember that Shakespeare wrote this for James I, and James I genuinely believed that witches were trying to harm him and his family. He genuinely believed in that. So when he was sat there watching Macbeth, those witches would have been real. Yeah, he genuinely would have believed that those witches were trying to cause Macbeth's downfall, the king's downfall. So keep that context in your mind. Key question here, are the witches to blame for Macbeth's downfall? And the answer is categorically no. A reading of the play that blames the witches or other supernatural forces is one which diminishes or even eradicates the tragedy. Okay? The play would not be a tragedy if the blame lay with the supernatural. Macbeth himself is to blame. So it's the same with the concept of Lady Macbeth. She is also not to blame. She does not control her husband. He controls himself. As I always say about your behaviour, you are responsible for your own actions. Macbeth is to blame. So they're involved, but they're catalysts and not puppet mistresses. Yeah, so they bring about the events, they start the events, but Macbeth is responsible. So the focus of the tragedy has to be on Macbeth's own actions and thoughts, so don't lose sight of that. The witches, are not the only elements of the supernatural, and we'll look at Banquo's ghosts and the apparitions in other masterclasses, but please remember that the tragedy in this play lies in Macbeth's actions and his own thoughts. The witches are purely catalysts to start off the tragic chain of events. Witches are some of the most memorable characters in Macbeth. People always remember bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. They remember those quotes, but they appear in just 3 scenes. They're not actually called the witches in the play. They're actually called the Weird Sisters. And the word weird, or weird in the Old English, means fate. Okay, so they are considered to be mistresses of fate. They bring about someone's actual destiny. So they're associated with darkness and confusion. So we've got a quote there: fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. So they bring the darkness and confusion, but they don't cause the actions, they just cause the situation. The sisters described how they prompt the conditions for misery, but they cannot actually cause the misery themselves. They're catalysts, and in a moment I'm going to talk about how we see that at the start of the play. So Macbeth is associated with darkness himself, because he says when he just before he meets them, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So his fate is deeply connected to the witches and the Weird Sisters. So their words, all hail Macbeth that shalt be king hereafter, that's the catalyst. That's the moment that causes Macbeth's course to take a definitive turn, mirroring the fate of the sailor. So I want to talk a little bit more about a scene that you probably don't remember. It's quite minor, but just in Act 1, Scene 3, when we meet the witches again on the heath, when Macbeth and Banquo are on the way home from the battle, before Macbeth arrives, the first witch has very significant words that tell us about Macbeth's fate. She talks about how she was tormenting a master of a ship because his wife had refused to give her some chestnuts or some nuts. She'd refused to help her, so she's decided to punish this sailor. And she talks about how she's going to drain him as dry as hay, and she's going to prevent him from sleeping. She's going to keep him weary for 7 nights, 9 times 9. She wants him to dwindle. He's going to be tempest tossed. And she says that she can't actually physically do anything to him, but she can make his life quite miserable. So there's a clear parallel there later on with what she does with Macbeth. She is going to take away Macbeth's sleep. He's also going to dwindle to nothingness by the end. So it's important to remember that the first witch, the first sister, can prompt the conditions for the sailor's misery, but she can't destroy the ship. So that's a metaphor for Macbeth. She can prompt the conditions for his downfall, but she can't cause his metaphorical ship to sink. He does that all on his own. So Macbeth's first words that we hear in this scene mirrors what they say, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So the audience knows that his fate is deeply bound up with the witches. So they know there's a connection there, and that's why he mirrors that phrase. So that repetition, that mirroring, is to show that his fate, and not Banquo's, is, well, Banquo's in a way, but we'll get to that later, his fate is tied up with the witches. So Banquo tells us how confusing these witches are and how uncertain their identity is. He talks about how they look not like inhabitants of the earth, and yet they are on it. And he's quite disconcerted by the witches. You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so. So Banquo recognises that these are not of this earth. He recognises that they are evil straight away. So Macbeth also must see that. So the statement, again, that is the most catalysing statement in the play, the one that sets everything off, the one without which we would not have a story, is given by the third witch: "All hail Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter." Macbeth says nothing from that point for 20 lines, but inside him, as we soon learn, his life has just taken a very definitive turn. So that's the moment that his course changes direction. That's the moment that thing has changed for Macbeth. If you remember any quote, remember that one: "All hail Macbeth, that shall be king hereafter." It is the most economical structural device I've ever come across as a teacher. It's so much is done in one tiny sentence. It lasts less than a second, but it changes everything. And Macbeth has a really physical reaction to the words that Banquo describes. So Banquo kind of narrates in detail Macbeth's reaction to that line. So why do you start and seem to fear things which sound so fair? So it's really important that Shakespeare wanted to acknowledge that line and the importance of that line, and that's why Banquo narrates his physical reaction, and to show that Macbeth is actually kind of intrigued that this is causing some sort of change. So they trigger this pre-existing tendency in Macbeth's mind. They're telling a man to do something he had already considered doing, something he partly wants to do in any case. It's really important to remember that later on, when he's telling Lady Macbeth, that this is a conversation they have already had. People blame her. It wasn't her idea. This is a conversation he has already thought about. He's already thought about killing the king. By giving them this prophecy, it's almost like they're just giving him permission to do what he wants to do. It triggers a complete change in his personality. He recognises the danger of their supernatural soliciting, but he can't control himself. This is, you know, all Macbeth's doing. Okay, so it's important to remember that he's completely aware of his actions. But if you remember any quote at all, remember "All hail Macbeth, that shall be king hereafter." It's a massively clever line. It takes 1 second, but it completely changes the structure of the play. So the key thing that I want you to take away is that Macbeth knows his soul will be destroyed. He absolutely knows his soul will be destroyed. Lady Macbeth doesn't have the same doubts as Macbeth. She kind of just goes into it. She doesn't seem to consider the consequences. Whereas when Lady Macbeth calls on the spirits that tend on mortal thoughts to unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of the direst cruelty, she encourages the murdering ministers and the sightless substance. He's horrified by that. He's absolutely horrified that she wants to be filled with the direst cruelty, you know, because he knows that his soul will be destroyed. It's theological. He knows what will happen to her if she does that. He knows what will happen to him if he murders Duncan. Okay, so it's really important that you understand that his soul will be destroyed by the deep damnation, and that's his words, the deep damnation of murdering Duncan. So by Act 2, Scene 1, the full terror of his impending act and what he's about to do in the dagger scene, he knows he is about to meddle with the forces beyond the natural. and he actually says nature seems dead and wicked dreams abuse, the curtains sleep, witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offering. You know, there are no witches in this point to push him on, no catalysts are needed, he's doing it all on his own. Okay, so the supernatural continues to appear in horrifying form, but only to Macbeth. Lady Macbeth doesn't seem to have the same kind of theological issue. She just goes along with it. It appears only to Macbeth. We see Banquo appears to him. So he's confronted with how he's subverted the natural order. He actually says, the time has been that when the brains were out, the man would die and there an end. He knows that when people normally die, they don't come back to life, but Banquo is there haunting him. Okay, so because of that, because he knows that nature and the rules have been completely subverted, that's what causes us to carry on murdering. People often wonder, once he's killed Banquo, why does he keep going? And it's because he knows it's a disaster. So he plunges recklessly on and he seeks to seek out the witches himself. So by Act 4 Scene 1, he's actively seeking the witches now. The unnatural has taken hold and it's completely transformed Macbeth. After all, what more does he have to lose now that he has lost his own soul? That's why he continues to murder everybody.